and another video for you. And this one is long overdue. I'm going to revisit the Avet reel lineup, especially their casting reels. It is 2018, February, and I've really let probably a year or so go by without talking about the G2 series reels in a video. Last one I did on Avet's probably was 4 or 5 years ago. So it's about time to talk about Avet a little bit. First off, with respect to Avet reels, I think all fishermen owe Avet some thanks. Were it not for these two brothers from up in the San Fernando Valley in California, if it were not for those two characters who both like to fish, we would probably still be working with a lot of the same sorts of gear that we had in hand during the 1990s and early 2000s. Avet changed things. They introduced machined aluminum lever drag reels that came out of the box with great free spool and very, very good casting performance. They were unique in that regard. Before Avet, these reels typically had to be tricked out. Cal Sheets did some work. Other guys did. Larry Kofi did some work in trying to make some of the gear spin a little better. Sleeving them and upgrading bearings, and a lot of guys tried to hot rod the pieces. We had a few different companies that came on the market as upgraded versions, basically, of pin reels. Pro Gear stands out. But we did not have much in the way of lever drags that could spin. Avet certainly turned the industry on its head with that, and with smaller, more compact 2-speed reels. And their gear was really made to take advantage of the super braids that were really coming into use in a great way in the early 2000s. Avet set the world up for some different types of fishing gear for fishermen. The idea of catching big fish on small reels, taking advantage of braid, is certainly something that Avet jumped on early. And they forced other manufacturers to go back to the drawing boards. Some companies were able to respond more rapidly than others. Accurate, for instance, pretty small company, sharp in design, they responded quickly. We saw a few other companies respond as well. But these days, 2018, we have a host of reels that are compact, that are lever drag, some with 2-speed, that are good casting pieces. And they all came after Avet. And in some respects, they offer some improvements, some differences. And in some cases, Avet just kept on pushing the envelope. The purpose of this video is to go over what Avet has on the market these days, and basically their 2 generations of products, and then to talk about the relative sizes of these reels, because it's all a matter of application as far as which one is right for your particular use. Okay, here's our group of Avet reels. And it's quite a colorful collection we have. I want to talk about sizing here a little bit, but basically this is our range of pieces. SXJs, SX standard width, MXJ, MXL wider, JX, LX, and the HX series. That's an HXJ for jigging, the standard width HX in a Dorado flavor, a camo on the HX wide. We'll come back to these. But that's the range and casting reel size from Avet, from the little tiny SXJs. We'll zoom in a little bit. So SXJs, that's a G2 in Neptune's heart color. SX on the wides. We'll go JX, narrow, or excuse me, MXJ, narrow, MXL, wider, and the JX, the red, would be the narrow. The LX is the wider version, and HXJ for jigging, HX standard width, and then the wide back behind her. Let's talk a little bit about first generation versus second generation reels from Avet. In truth, the first second generation reel from Avet was the HX. here in the nice custom and unique and probably soon to be discontinued Dorado pattern. Every once in a while Avet will do kind of a special production, and this is what that is an HX. The HX was the first G2, and it has a more of a stepped spool, so a little greater line capacity. Also has the ramp, for your lever. So a little more precise in terms of your drag setting is possible with that, and it's impossible to accidentally push the lever all the way up into full. That's a difference with the G2s across the board. They all will have this ramp. But let's go through using the JX, which is, if there's one reel to own for anybody who's getting on a boat and going long range type fishing, even overnighters, having a good 40-pound outfit is very much key. Avet made use of, or they incorporated the use of braid within the sizing of their reels. A JX, and this is the standard first generation piece, would allow a person to fish 40 beautifully. But let's go over differences a little bit. Standard series, which are still on the market. At some point, I would suspect they would go away. There is no ramp, basically it uses a cam, so there's a stop here, and then you can slide the lever forward. Actually, you've got a little bait feeder stop here, which isn't a feature that's terribly used. Some guys liked it. It would put a little mechanical pressure on the spool to slow it down. Now, uniquely within Avet's line, and here's our adjustment for the drag. That's your preset. And we've got a video that's up that shows how to operate the reels and deal with them. But basically, first generation reels, no ramp. Drag setting was appropriate for the line test being used. In this case, we'd have up to 15 pounds of drag measured at strike, and then would button down, let's say, at 20 on the standard series. The second generation reels, which this black represents, we can see on the G2, a little different side. This one also has a magnetic cast control, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Basically, we've got the ramp. Spool's cut a little bit differently. The frame is cut a little bit differently. Maybe you can see the cutout there on both sides. Machining a little bit nicer, which really to be expected as Avet progresses. A nicer reel, capable of higher drag capability. In the case of the G2s, now we're at 21 pounds of drag on a JX, and it'll button down close to 28. That's a significant difference on the piece. And then the third series of reels that Avet brought out prior to the G2s were their Raptor series, and this is a Raptor. Raptor, again, makes use of the slider, ramp for your lever, and you have to push a button to go beyond that, and to go into full. It locks it out. And it's a little tiny bit wider on the side plate because the Raptors incorporate another drag plate. They're not a twin drag like an Accurate with drag being applied from both sides of the spool. But we've got two washers on the right side and are capable of producing higher drag numbers. That's the benefit. How much higher? Well, instead of 20 pounds, you're at 30 pounds at strike, up to 40 pounds at full. Certainly, we're not going to be using these reels at that sort of drag load because, again, I look at a JX as being something that's going to be fishing a little bit lighter than you would justify that drag capability for. But just like a car, we do better if we're working, away from the red line. Now, we're not going to live a long life at red line or at maxing things out. So having that additional headroom on the drag is indeed a positive, very much a positive. So basically, first generation, no ramp, a little softer on the drag. G2, a little more aggressive in terms of the drag capability, and you've got a ramp. Spool cut a little bit differently, but really you're not seeing that so much on the JX because they really are casting pieces. And then the Raptor. So 3 different versions of the same piece, but there's more to it than that. There are actually more variations. Avet reels are available in single speed or in 2-speed form. Okay, so now we can take the standard pieces not the Raptors, because they have everything on them, all the bells and whistles. But the G1s and G2s can be ordered as single speed pieces or as 2-speed pieces. And they can be ordered with a magnetic cast control or without the magnetic cast control. Both of these reels incorporate the cast control. This would be an example of that same sort of size. This is an LX rather than a JX, with no cast control. The cast control is magnetic. There's a 1 through 5 dial. Let's see if we can get a little closer to the camera lens there. Basically, you have a 1 through 5. I tend to max that up to the 5 if I'm tossing some heavier iron. If I'm dealing with bait or lighter lures, I may drop it down. And certainly when I drop that down to 1, I'll use my thumb more to slow the spool down on a cast. The cast control works beautifully. It's not mechanical. It is simply using a magnet. And for someone who is a spool spinner, they'll note that it won't spin as long simply because the magnet is correcting for that and trying to slow things down. Just trust that in your hands, these are beautiful casting reels. The JX is probably my favorite size reel from Avet. It's like an old Mule 332 in the hands. It just feels right. And it's the perfect size for dealing with 40 and 50-pound lines. So, first gen, second generation, third generation product. Next, let's look at the 3 basic sizes of Avet reels. And basically what we have here, this is an SX. That's an MXL, followed by a JX and an LX. The JX and LX are the same pieces. The LX is simply wider. So greater line capacity on the LX version of a JX. But they're the same reels and same sort of capabilities. So maybe by fairness, we'll put our LX here in this group. All of these reels will hold ample line for their intended application. The standard SX will hold about 220 yards of 20-pound mono. An MXL would hold, let me think here for a sec. In terms of 20-pound, you're at about 360 yards. So say 220, 360 of the same test. When we get to a JX version, okay, the JX would hold about 260 of 30-pound line, where the LX is up there, I'll call it 300 yards of 40-pound. So 300 to 40 on an LX, MXL, call it, you're probably at about, I'm going to say 240-ish of 30-pound, really 220 of 30-pound mono. That's not the way typically guys fish them these days. And about 200 to 220 yards of 20-pound on an SX. Typically what folks do will put braid on as a backing and then fill it up the rest of the way with mono. It depends on the application. Most folks on a little SX like that, they may go 30 to 50-pound braid. If you go 50, not much to work with in terms of a top shot. 30-pound, 300 yards, 30 still leaves you about 120 yards of mono on top of say 20-pound. So you can get over 400 yards on a little SX like that. MXL, again, most folks would go 50-pound on the braid. And with 50-pound on the braid, you've got, again, 120 to 140 yards mono on top of that. 50, like I said, maxes out, pretty close to maxes out in SX. 50-pound on the MXL leaves you room for a top shot. And then on an LX, most would opt for 60-pound on the braid, 300 yards of 60. You've got room for, say, 120 yards or so of 40-pound, even 50-pound, close to 100 yards on top. More often than not, on a JX, we'll go 50-pound for the braid, 300 yards, leaving room for about 120 yards of 40-pound on top of it. Nice range to be, having over 400 yards to play with. JX, again, being narrower, is a nicer casting piece. This difference in width doesn't stop with the JX and LX series. Avet does the same thing with the MX series and the MXJ, which is simply a narrower version. And on the SX, same story. We also have the little SXJ This is a G2. This would be an SXJ and a G1. Okay, here is our first generation, SXJ, the skinnier version of an SX. G2, you can see it has the ramp. Now we've got a standard width SX. 3 of these are 2 speeds. This is a single speed. And then we have the Raptor version of a full-size SX. So 2 full-size, 2 small-size SXJs. What's the difference? SX series, in the first generation, would turn up to 10 pounds worth of drag, measured at strike, buttoning down at 15. And I've seen some specs that'll say 9 pounds worth of drag, buttoning down at 14. Regardless, great little reels for fishing, say, up to 30-pound line. Some people will put heavier line on them, but the reality is, in terms of drag, that's what the capability is. It's going to be a 30-pound or less, and preferably less, in terms of what they will do. Now, when we go G2 versus G1, so on an SXJ on the G2, now we've got 13 pounds worth of drag to work with versus, say, 10. Only 3 pounds difference. It's greater than that in terms of what it allows you to do. And you button down at 20 pounds. That's the same for the full size. The drag numbers are going to be the same. First generation, 10 and 15 pounds. Second generation, 13 and 20. What does that mean? Well, let's say if we're a fairly aggressive fisherman, we're fishing our drags at 30% of whatever that line test is. 30-pound line, 10 pounds worth of drag. G2s, we've got an extra 3 pounds above that number. So, we're fishing it a little more conservatively. We've got more drag to work with. Doesn't make them 40-pound reels. It makes them better 30-pound pieces. Much better 30-pound pieces. Could you push it more than that? You could, but whenever you push things beyond what they're intended for, some things, you have some unintended consequences. In the case of Avet Reels, if you hear of anyone out there who's had issues with bearings, chances are they're overfishing the reels. They're not fishing within the design parameters of the piece. The beauty with a lever drag reel is we can use a spring scale to set that drag appropriately, to dial in the preset. So we're fishing at the range the reel needs to fish at, both for its use and certainly from a line test standpoint. And then you allow the drag to do what it's supposed to do as far as tiring the fish out. Okay, now when we take this to Raptor, again, that world of drag changes considerably, because instead of at 13 pounds, now we're up to 17, buttoning down at 26. There are plenty of people that will put straight 50-pound braid on an SX, full width SX, with a very small top shot of, say, even fluorocarbon, just 25 feet or less, and fish the piece aggressively as a 50-pound reel. On the 2-speed stuff, your gear ratios are 6 and 4, okay? So high speed is a little bit over 6 to 1, low speed is 3.8, call it 4 to 1. That's the same sort of gearing that we see with the MXJs and MXLs. It's still a 6-4 relationship between low and high speed. The MX series really is, in many respects, the same reel as is the SX. The gearing is the same. It's 6 and 4 when you go 2-speed. Even on the Raptor, it doesn't drop that gearing down lower. It's still a 6 and 4. So plenty fast on the high end. 4 to 1, given the intended line tests, is an appropriate drag range. One could argue that having more or a lower gear ratio to work with could prove beneficial. I was a dumb guy at one point in my life, well, many points in my life, but a few years ago I hooked into a big bluefin. 150 to 180 probably was the weight. I was on the doggone thing for close to 4 hours fishing an MXL Raptor. I had plenty of drag to deal with the fish. I could have caught the doggone thing, I felt. But the gear ratio was not helpful. I needed to be more like 3 to 1, 2 to 1 to have had a shot on such a big fish on a small reel. The drag was there, on my Raptor. I've got 20 pounds to work with or better. But I'm still at 4 to 1, and I just couldn't make headway. I'd make some headway, and the fish would take that back over and over and over again. Could have just been the fish. Could have just been an angler that wasn't that good. But I think what I learned from it is having a low. If you're going to go after the bigger fish, you want as low as you can get. That certainly is not the intent of reels in this class. You could probably argue that you may have even more better cranking power on the littler guys than you would the bigger. But I don't have anything to back that one up. It's just physics. The height of the spool, how much line per crank. Probably that gear ratio. You probably have the effect of even a lower gear ratio, given the amount of line coming back per turn of the handle. Drag number is the same on the MX series as it is on the SX series. The reels are the same. The options are the same. You can get them without the cast control or with the cast control, first generation or second generation or Raptor. So 3 different ways, again, to get most all of Avet's reels, with the exception of the HXs, which started out life as a G2. Okay, next up. Back to our JX and LX comparison. When we go JX and LX, now we have a little bit different gearing to work with. These are 6 and 3. So 6 to 1 on the high, 3 to 1 on the low. Gives you a little more cranking power. Certainly on that bluefin, I would have been better off fishing my JXs than the MXL. But you never know until you get bit which one you're going to be with. On the G2s, you're at 21 pounds of drag on the G2s versus 14 pounds at strike. Standards, 14 and 20 for drag ratio. That's really, really dandy for fishing 40-pound line. So up to 14 pounds at strike, buttoning down at 20, dandy for fishing 40-pound line. When we take that to a G2, the world changes a little bit. On the G2s, it's 21 pounds worth of drag. Let's pull out a G2 to stick that on the same. On the G2s, now we're at 21 pounds of drag measured at strike, buttoning down at 28. That makes the JX a really, really nice reel for fishing anything from 30 pound. It's not too big a reel to fish 30 on, but it does dandy at 40 and 50, and yeah, you could fish 60 on the doggone things because your strike setting is 20 pounds. Sounds like that's ample for fishing 60. Personal preference, 40 and 50-pound lines, the G2s are perfect for that. And you could go one step above and get into the Raptor series. And with the Raptor, well, sky's the limit, but we still have physical space. Excuse me. The Raptor bumps that up, 30 pounds and 40 pounds for your drag. Okay, typical rigging on our JXs, like I said, 50 to 60 pound on the braid. That will dictate how much of a top shot you have. If you went with, say, 50 on the JX, you're going to have 120 yards of 40 pound on top, a 50 pound braid. If you were to go 60 pound, which makes some sense if you're going to push and fish the reel at 50, then you're probably looking at close to half that yardage for your top shot. So instead of 120 yards, maybe you're 60, 80 in that range for your topper. But let's say as a benchmark, maybe call it 50 yards top shot with 60-pound braid as your backing. But again, that allows you to fish the piece a little more aggressively. On the LX size, this is the LX here compared to the JX. An LX Raptor, let's say, specifically the Raptor, I see a lot of guys putting 80-pound braid on, and that's not a bad call, especially with a knot connection at 80-pound braid. You can fish the piece at 60-pound. Inline connection, you can fish it at 80. The sizing allows ample line capacity to do both with. It provides a nice alternative to the HX series, given that a JX and LX rather, and the HX, there's a diameter difference, and for some guys in casting, having a little bit smaller diameter, like you have on an LX and a JX, is a more comfortable cast than an HX, which is really a 4.0 size, like a Pin 113H. Actually, it's an HN, it's a narrow version, in terms of the size, relative sizing. Some guys' hands, JX, LX is a nicer way to go. LX for the same sort of line capacity as we'd have off the HX. Next series of reels to look at would be the HX series. Again, HXJ for jigging, standard with HX, and then the HXW. Now, the HX is unique. Kind of surprising because the way they've cut the spool and the relative sizing, A standard HX holds about the same line capacity as we'd get on a 30 narrow, as a big game reel. The wide, about the same sort of line capacity as we'd have on a 30 wide, surprisingly. Okay, what does that translate into? If I put 80-pound braid on a little SXJ, which I own, you'll get about 300 yards and you'll have less than 25 yards probably to play with for your leader. 80-pound does that. 60-pound is a nicer place for this to be in terms of line capacity because you'll have more to play with on top. Maybe getting closer to 100 yards, or maybe you'll be able to bump up closer to a total of 500 yards on that reel instead of only 300, which again going 80 would give you. The standard width HX is really the better size for most guys to fish. It allows for a good 300 yards of 80-pound braid with a top shot of say 60 of 120 yards or so. Some guys will max that out, go 500 yards of 80-pound braid, and then run a shorter top shot. Or just say fluorocarbon for your leader at 25 yards. That works out real well. The HXW, aside from some particular applications, if I look at the long range side of things, the HXW is kind of a stealthy little piece. When we go Raptor on that, instead of looking at a 5-to-1 and a 2-to-1 gear ratio for the low, 2-to-1, a lot of cranking power, the Raptor version drops it down even more. So you've got 1.8 on your low. That's wonderful in terms of cranking power. You also pick up the lugs on 2 out of 3 of these guys, and I think the Raptor version of the SXJ incorporates the lugs also, if my memory is serving me correctly. 500 yards of 80 with ample top shot, or 500 yards of that 80-pound braid to max out your capacity. Going here on the wide, hell, you can do your 80 at 500 and have quite a bit of mono on top. You can go 500 yards of that 80-pound and wind up with something around maybe 140 yards or so, 160 yards of 60-pound on top. Going Raptor, most guys will go 100-pound braid on the HXW, which is a good place for it to be. I don't view this as even with the drag numbers that it has in the Raptor form, I don't view this as a 130-pound class piece. You probably don't have the structural rigidity, not enough metal to do that well. But it's a dandy piece at 100, and you can catch an awful big fish at 100. When you go with the wide, you also get the 30 type handle, so a much larger handle instead of the ball, for speed, bigger crank, angled out, a little more cranking power on the HXW. HXW, again, going Raptor, 100-pound, easy enough. Certainly 80 and 100 are beautiful on the Raptors. If you don't go Raptor, look at these guys as being anywhere from 50-pound for your top shot on up to 60, a push to 80. The drag numbers are sort of kind of there to do 80. It's 20 pounds worth of drag measured at strike on the HX, and they'll button down to about 28. Going Raptor, it's like 40 and 50. It's a ton of drag. It's more drag than you're going to want to pull on something of that size. That's your range of Avet casting reels. SX series, 15 to 30-pound application. MX series, again, call it 20 to 30-pound type of application without going Raptor on either one of them. JX, 30 and 40-pound application. Go G2, now it's 30 to 50-pound application, very, very nicely. Go with the LX size, you can bump it up to 80. HXs, 50 through 80-pound application. Going Raptor, you can bump that up one line class. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the big game series from Avet. This is a 30 narrow. If you can compare your spool size to that little HX, you can see, surprising, they'll hold the same amount of line, a 30 narrow or a standard with HX. HXW holds line like a 30 wide, which I should have on the counter here, and I don't. It looks like I need to get some more of those guys in. Let's go over some numbers a little bit on the big game pieces. I'm not going to drag out the 80 from Avet. Those are some beasts, and they're available. But let's talk about these two platforms, our 30 size and our 50 size. Okay, on the 30 class Avets, they'll produce up to 35 pounds worth of drag measured at strike, and they'll button down over 40. Very, very appropriate reels for fishing. Oh, really up to 130 pound realistically. Better pieces at say 80 to 100. Quite effective in that range. You could say the same. The 50s. Very, very effective at 130 pound for the braid. So most guys will fish them. Some will put 200 pound on a 50 wide. I don't know how much sense that really makes. You're eating up a lot of line capacity for minimal gain. Your drag is different between the 50 series and the 30 series, as one would likely expect. The 50s will do 50 pounds worth of drag measured at strike, and they'll button down in the upper 50s, almost 60 pounds, 57, 58 pounds worth of drag on your 50 class. The 50 class, they're bigger reels and they're heavier reels. If you're going to go out and fish a cow, as mentioned in another video, you really want the benefit of what the 50 does for you. In terms of gearing as well, they both have plenty of torque to work with, and there's a way to kind of add to that a little bit. You're dropping down, under 2 to 1, on these big guns. Okay, on your 30s, whether 2-speed or 3-speed, you figure it's a 60 to 100 pound class reel, where your 50s are really your 80 pound to effectively 130. You could say unlimited in terms of how much drag they do and how much we can hold on to. This particular 30 is a 3-speed. Gear ratios on high in your 30 class. You're at 3.8, almost 4 to 1, and then you drop down to 2 to 1, as you do with the HX series, until you get Raptor, which drops down a little bit more. So 2 to 1 on the low, real appropriate for fishing, that 100-pound line and down, for a max. Where the 50, now we're at 4, almost 4 to 1 on the high, call it 3.8 again, but we drop down to 1.3 on the 2-speed. So better, cranking power on a bigger fish at 1.3 to 1. Almost a granny gear. If you want the granny gear of a 1 to 1, you got to go to the 3-speed. This is a 3-speed here. Let's just see how that works a little bit. So basically, right now, I'm at 4 to 1. When I push it in once, now I'm at 2 to 1. And if I'm still not gaining back line, I push it one more time, and now I am at 1 to 1. And this is, at that end game when everything's vertical, this is a great place to be as far as getting the fish, turning its head, coming back your way. And then you bump it, drop her, bump it, and now we're all the way out. Back to 2 to 1, back to 4 to 1, 2 to 1, 1 to 1. Okay. The Avets are machines. They're not made to be quiet. What you're hearing is the sound of success. That is, it is not a silent anti-reverse. It makes some noise. Trust me, it does not scare the fish. But it is the sound of security. There are some companies out there that have silent dogs on the anti-reverse. That's fine. Sometimes people don't notice and they think, oh, they're silent. That must be a good thing. And it turns out it's just a one-way bearing, which will go out at some time. You want the dogs as well. The better reels give you the dogs as well as a bearing. Now, Avet can make it quiet if they want to. That's quiet on the anti-reverse. But they don't do that on the big game pieces. They keep them a little bit noisy so we know what's going on. Gear ratio, when you go 3-speed on the 50s, same, it's 4, 2, and 1. So great cranking power. If you want a lower gear ratio, you can get it. Drag numbers don't change, and the nice thing is the 3-speeds actually have come down a bit in price. The 3-speeds are a pretty good option for some folks, especially if they're feeling a little more challenged on the bigger fish. Maybe muscles are atrophying a little bit. You don't have quite as much to work with. Even if you do, 1 to 1 is a delightful place to be on a big fish. So that is really a kind of maybe not so brief rundown of Avet Reels. from the little guys, to some of the big guys. I don't mention the 80s because the 80s are the same as the 50s, basically. It's the same drag capability. Gearing is the same. It simply have more line to work with. Some of the land-based shark guys, some guys using them for trolling and they want more line capacity would opt towards an 80. Certainly a kite application that makes sense, and then go ahead and bump up to maybe 200 pound on the braid. But you're not doing that because of greater drag capability. You still have more drag than most humans are going to be able to, deal with. So from small to big, Avet, I think we owe them. So there you have a long overdue video on Avet Reels. Apologies for not doing this, last year, but better late than never. First generation pieces set the world on its head. Second generation pieces incorporated some things Avet learned over time and incorporated some features that anglers wanted. Third generation, I don't see that one coming for some time. Avet's in pretty good position in the marketplace given what they offer. Again, all of us can thank Avet, because 17 or so years ago, they weren't around and our options were far fewer. These days, thanks to Avet, I'd say reels across the board have improved. They had to. They were getting dominated. You go on the boats out of San Diego right now, and you'll see how many people are fishing the Avet Reels. When I started up, that was not the case. Over the last, well, Avet's been around for 17 or 18 years now, I guess, pretty close to it. We opened our retail storefront in 2001. Quickly started working with Avet Reels, probably 2002. Found them, I didn't participate in the Fred Hall show that year, but we heard a buzz from a few anglers and got a couple of their reels in. Basically, it was a JX and an LX. I think maybe they just had the LXs. Incredible free spool out of the things and very impressive. And so we, published the information and started working with the manufacturer, and they learned and we learned and we both kind of developed. We've been Avet's largest dealer now since that time. We're the largest dealer in the world. Bigger than distributors, bigger than any other dealer. Because I guess maybe we were there first, but also our guys well know the product. We've tried to maintain a good inventory, which is not always easy when you have these pieces made in so many different colors and so many different configurations. I mean, my gosh, you look at an SX and it's not just an SX anymore. It's either a first generation, second generation, or Raptor piece. And then with the first and second gens, they're available 4 different ways, with or without cast control, with or without 2-speed. Get into the JXs and the LXs, and you can add a couple different single speed gear ratios. So you do that in 10 different flavors, and there's, it's a pretty hard one to keep, keep control of the inventory. But Avet is an amazing company. They're small, they're very much integrated. Another family member does the anodizing for them, and they're able to turn things very, very fast. Their stock room isn't any bigger than our office area. In fact, it's about half the size. But their factory floor is pretty good size with 30 plus CNC machines in there. They can take, they can start from bar stock and finish up the reels within probably about 2 weeks time, or less if they're really pushing on it. It's an amazing operation, and it's an American success story. The 2 brothers that started this firm started without a heck of a lot. Their dad was a cobbler, basically a shoemaker, in communist days. They're from Armenia area, which was a former Soviet Union country now. And he saved a little bit, maybe made a few shoes at home that nobody knew about, and he sold those and basically helped set the kids up, the 2 boys up. And they came over, married, families. Avet actually is the father's name, so they're respecting their dad, And these 2 guys, 2 different characters, no doubt, but hard working. And I noticed that my first time I visited the factory. You see things, when you go to factories and you visit with people. But early on, I was over there and saw their operation, and I had to excuse myself and use the restroom. When I went into the restroom, what did I see? I didn't see paper towels. I saw regular hand towels, as well as a shaver and a couple of toothbrushes and whatever else. indicative of guys that were really burning some hours in trying to build their company up. And my gosh, they certainly have. They're a dominant player now, and they were nothing when they started up. They were making medical pieces. Their busy season was the wintertime, making bone replacements, for people getting injured in ski accidents. But the guys like to fish, and fishing reels, for them that was a dream come true to make something they actually would use, and they've done that with great success. So we appreciate the fact that we've been able to work closely with the manufacturer. Probably not always easy for them to put up with me, and probably on my side I get my frustrations too. But there's no discounting the fact that Avet, came from nothing, and they have created a company, that offers, that really, they offer anglers a lot, but they offered something that wasn't in the market until they came along. So, kudos, to the guys at Avet for what they've done, and we're very proud, to have represented them as long as we have, to the degree that we have, So I probably owe them a little bit, and maybe they owe us a little bit too. It's been a good relationship, of which, many of the manufacturers we work with, same sort of thing. Some good people, and nice to see them successful. So, thanks for watching. A little long-winded, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of a basis on these pieces. And if you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me or one of the other guys or gals that work with us. Everybody's pretty well up to speed on the Avet Reels, of course. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Until next time.